Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
Today, we're going to be looking at something that you probably don't think about too often.
Okay.
The sustainability of all this streaming that we do.
Right.
Yeah. And specifically, we're going to be using an article from Mobile Magazine titled How Rakuten TV Aims to Achieve More Sustainable Streaming.
Okay.
And this should be pretty interesting because Rakuten TV is a big player in Europe, but a lot of people over here in North America and other places might not really know about it.
Right.
So I think it'll be interesting to get a new perspective on how streaming can be more sustainable.
Yeah, for sure. And it is interesting you bring that up because I think we really are moving into this new era of streaming where it's no longer just about how much content can we get out there, how many subscribers can we get.
Right.
I think companies like Rakuten TV are starting to realize that their impact on the world is something they need to consider.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And you mentioned they're big in Europe.
Huge.
But most people here, like I said, probably have no idea who they are.
Yeah.
Give us the rundown.
So think of it this way. If you take like a Hulu, a Netflix, and a cable company kind of all bundled into one, that's sort of the scope of what Rakuten TV is doing over in Europe.
Wow.
They've got a massive library, over 10,000 on-demand titles.
Okay.
Hundreds of streaming channels.
Yeah.
They reach over 150 million households.
Wow.
But what I think is really interesting about them and what makes their sustainability push so important is how they get onto people's televisions.
Okay.
So a lot of the time you'll buy a TV, especially a smart TV,
Right.
and it'll come preloaded with Rakuten TV.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's even a dedicated button right on your remote control.
Oh, wow.
So it's like this unavoidable presence in a lot of European homes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and that leads me to my next point.
Right.
Because, unavoidable presence aside, the average person probably doesn't think too much about the impact of streaming.
Right.
Like it's all digital, it's all in the cloud, it's eco-friendly. What's the problem?
Well, the problem comes down to scale, I think. We're talking about huge data centers that are storing all of this content.
Right.
And then all the energy that it takes to transmit that content out to millions and millions of devices.
Wow.
It's sort of this hidden cost of convenience that I think the industry is finally starting to wake up to.
So they're starting to wake up to it. And I think a good sign of that is this
Absolutely.
sustainability report that Rakuten TV put out.
Yeah.
This is their first ever.
Yeah, it definitely points to them taking this seriously.
Right.
When a company starts to actually report on their sustainability efforts, that to me is a sign that they're not just paying lip service.
For sure.
It shows a real desire for transparency.
Yeah, and that's something that I think consumers are demanding more and more of these days.
Absolutely.
And investors, too. I mean,
Yeah.
that factors into decisions, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Well, speaking of the report, there's a pretty impressive statistic that jumped out at me.
Okay.
A 69.4% reduction in CO2 emissions. That's not just like turning the lights off in the office.
Yeah, not all.
How do they achieve a number like that?
So they're really focusing on those data centers that we were talking about.
Okay.
So it's about moving to renewable energy sources to power those facilities.
Right.
And then looking at how can we make the hardware in those facilities as efficient as possible.
Yeah.
And even things like cooling those servers is a huge energy drain.
Oh, really?
So they're looking at innovative ways to cool those servers more efficiently.
So it's a really deep dive into the infrastructure.
Yeah, it's not just a few quick fixes.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental rethink of how they operate.
Wow. And it seems like they're taking it beyond just the environmental side of things, too.
Right.
I was reading about this program they're doing called AVOD for Impact.
Yeah.
I've never heard of a streaming platform doing this before.
It's a really interesting approach. So AVOD stands for Advertising-Based Video on Demand.
Okay.
So essentially it's free content that's supported by advertising. But what Rakuten TV is doing is they're taking those ad slots and instead of using them for traditional advertising, they're donating that space to NGOs.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so they're using their platform to promote social good.
So like built-in PSAs, basically.
Exactly, yeah.
What kind of causes are they focusing on?
I've seen everything from climate change awareness
Yeah.
to gender equality to mental health resources.
Wow.
I mean, it's really a broad spectrum,
Yeah.
and it's a really clever way to leverage their reach and amplify the work that these organizations are already doing.
Yeah, for sure. And they're going even further than that, right?
Oh, yeah.
They're actually creating their own original content
That's right.
that's focused on social issues.
Yeah, and they're offering that content for free, which shows that,
Wow.
it's not just about profit for them.
Right.
They're using this content to really raise awareness and spark conversations.
So it's not just like throwing in a token diverse character here or there.
Yeah.
It's a deliberate shift towards more socially conscious programming.
Exactly. And what I find so fascinating about this is it's not just Rakuten TV.
Right.
This is part of a larger trend we're seeing across the entire entertainment industry.
Yeah.
There's this real move towards purpose-driven content.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder,
Yeah.
is this just because audiences are demanding it?
Right.
Or is this...
A genuine concern. I mean, it's a question that's hard to answer,
Yeah.
but it's a conversation that we need to have.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, think about all the documentaries, the biopics, the issue-driven shows that have
Yeah.
been super popular lately.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that makes you wonder if audiences are looking for something more than just entertainment.
Yeah, are they looking for content that reflects their values?
Right.
Content that actually makes them think and feel something.
For sure. And speaking of making you think and feel something,
Yeah.
I was interested to read about the work that Rakuten TV is doing internally
Yeah.
around diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Huge focus for them.
The article touched on that a bit. They've got recruitment programs, career advancement,
Yeah.
professional development. I mean, it
Mm.
seems like they're really trying to make changes, not just on screen, but also behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction.
Right.
It's not just about what you show, it's about who's making the decisions
Exactly.
and building a company culture that really reflects the values that you're trying to project.
Right, but how do you know, how do those things actually connect?
Right.
Like, how do those internal initiatives actually affect the content that ends up on the screen?
Well, I think it comes down to this. If you create a more diverse and inclusive work environment,
Okay.
you're naturally going to have a wider range of perspectives
Right.
influencing the creative process.
Yeah.
So that means better storytelling,
Okay.
more nuanced representation,
Yeah.
and ultimately a more authentic and impactful product.
So it's not just about checking boxes.
Not at all.
It's about creating a real cultural shift.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not always easy, but I think that's what makes what Rakuten TV is doing so commendable,
Okay.
because they're really trying to make that happen.
And that brings us back to the importance of that sustainability report,
Yeah,
because it's a commitment to transparency.
absolutely.
It's a way for them to not just say that they're doing these things, but to actually show people what they're doing.
Yeah, and to track their progress.
Right. And to be held accountable.
Exactly.
It's a big deal in an industry that can feel really opaque at times.
Yeah, I think it's really refreshing to see a company like Rakuten TV stepping up like this.
Yeah. And it makes me wonder if other streaming services are going to feel the pressure to follow suit.
I think they will. I mean, the industry is watching.
Yeah.
And if Rakuten TV can show that sustainability and social impact can go hand in hand with success, I think it could have a ripple effect across the entire industry.
Right.
It could push everyone towards a more responsible future.
Well, it sounds like Rakuten TV is putting their money where their mouth is. But what does that actually look like? You know, what are the specific goals that they're aiming for?
Well, they're not just talking about, vague improvements. They're making concrete commitments.
Okay.
Like developing a decarbonization strategy that's aligned with the Science-Based Targets Initiative.
So the SBTI, I've heard of that, but break it down for me and for our listeners who might not know.
So the SBTI is like the gold standard
Okay.
for corporate climate action.
Yeah.
It's basically a collaboration between leading organizations like the UN Global Compact
Oh, yeah.
and the World Resources Institute.
Yeah.
And what they do is they help companies set emissions reduction targets that are in line with the latest climate science.
So it's not just arbitrary, it's like scientifically based.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sure that companies aren't just setting easy goals.
Right.
They're actually setting goals that are ambitious enough to make a real difference.
Wow.
And it sends a really strong signal to investors,
Okay.
to stakeholders, to consumers,
Yeah.
that they're serious about addressing their environmental impact.
Okay. And on the content side of things,
Yeah,
they're talking about being more intentional about the stories that they're putting out there.
right.
And specifically, they mention wanting to showcase underrepresented voices and stories about social change.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, this is where their environmental goals and their social goals really start to come together.
Okay.
They're not just looking to be a platform for any content.
Right.
They want to be a platform for content that's driving positive change in the world.
So they're really taking a curated approach.
Yeah, they're hand-picking projects.
Oh.
They're developing originals
Right.
that highlight marginalized communities
Yeah.
and, push for social justice.
That's a bold move, especially in an industry where it seems like everyone's just chasing the biggest audience possible.
Yeah, it is bold.
Yeah.
And it raises some really interesting questions.
Yeah, cool.
What does it mean for a major streaming platform to champion these stories? Can they actually make a difference? Yeah, can they move the needle?
Right. Can they change how we understand the world around us?
Those are some big questions.
Yeah.
But I guess that's what a deep dive is all about, right?
Absolutely.
Digging below the surface.
Yeah.
And really uncovering the complexities of these issues.
And in this case, it goes way beyond one company or one platform.
Right.
We're talking about the role of media in a world that's facing unprecedented social and environmental challenges.
Yeah.
So the stakes are high.
For sure.
But the potential for positive change is huge.
Definitely.
It's easy to get lost in, all the big numbers and the corporate strategies.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it all comes down to us.
Right, the viewers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have the power to shape the future of streaming.
It's like voting with your dollar, right?
Yeah, but in this case, it's voting with your subscriptions,
Right.
your views, your time.
Right.
These platforms are businesses.
Yeah.
And they're going to respond to what they think audiences want.
That's true.
So if we're not demanding sustainable and inclusive practices, are
Right.
they really going to prioritize them?
That's a good point. Yeah, it's easy to feel like, our individual choices don't really make a difference.
Right.
But collectively, I guess they could have a huge impact.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it this way.
Okay.
If enough people start demanding more transparency about a streaming service's environmental footprint,
Right.
or if there's a huge surge in viewership for content that promotes social good,
Okay.
those platforms are going to take notice.
So what can we actually do?
Yeah.
I mean, beyond just tweeting our complaints
Right.
into the void.
Well, I think for starters, we can be more mindful of our own streaming habits.
Okay.
I'm not saying we need to ditch streaming altogether,
Right.
but maybe we can ask ourselves some questions like,
Right.
do I really need to be subscribed to 5 different services at once?
Okay.
Could I be more intentional about the content that I choose to watch?
So being a more conscious consumer, basically.
Exactly. Just like we're becoming more aware of where our food comes from
Yeah.
and the impact it has on the environment,
Okay.
we can apply those same principles to our entertainment choices.
Okay. So, supporting platforms that align with our values.
Exactly.
So, for example, if you're really passionate about environmental sustainability, maybe you choose to subscribe to a service that has, a really strong commitment to reducing their carbon footprint.
Exactly. Or if social justice is really important to you,
Yeah.
you seek out content that highlights diverse voices
Okay.
and challenges inequality.
So really putting your money where your mouth is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are other ways to make a difference, too.
Okay.
We can support organizations that are pushing for greater sustainability and inclusivity in the industry.
Oh, okay.
There are groups out there that are advocating for things like energy-efficient streaming protocols.
Interesting.
Better representation both in front of and behind the camera.
Okay, so using our wallets and our voices to kind of push for the changes that we want to see.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, let's bring it back to Rakuten TV for a second.
Okay.
We talked about their goal of developing that decarbonization strategy
Right.
that's aligned with the SBTI.
Right.
What does that actually look like in practice?
So it means that they're not just making vague promises.
Okay.
They're actually committing to a really rigorous process
Got it.
of measuring and reducing their emissions
Yeah.
across their entire operation.
Okay.
So this could involve things like switching to renewable energy sources to power their offices,
Right.
their data centers,
Yeah.
and then investing in more energy-efficient technology.
Right.
We talked about how much energy those data centers use.
Right.
So finding ways to optimize that is crucial.
Yeah, for sure. And it goes beyond just their own internal operations too, right?
Absolutely.
Because they're also working with their content producers
Yeah,
to adopt more sustainable production practices.
exactly. It's about influencing the whole ecosystem around them.
Because it doesn't really matter if their data centers are running on 100% renewable energy.
Right.
If the shows and movies they're streaming are being produced in ways
Mhm.
that are harmful to the environment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it undermines the whole effort.
So it's a really holistic approach.
It is, yeah. It's recognizing that they're part of a larger system.
And they're also being more intentional about the content that they're commissioning
Right.
and acquiring specifically They mentioned, showcasing underrepresented voices,
Yeah,
stories of social change.
absolutely.
Do you think this could be more than just a trend?
It's hard to say, but it does feel like we're at a turning point
Okay.
where entertainment and social impact are becoming more and more intertwined.
I mean, look at all the documentaries and biopics that are winning awards these days.
Right, exactly. And with streaming platforms having such a global reach,
Yeah.
they have the potential to amplify these stories in a way that traditional media never could.
So it's not just about what we watch, but
Right.
who we choose to watch it with.
Exactly. By supporting platforms that are committed to sustainability
Yeah.
and inclusivity,
Right.
we're sending a message to the entire industry.
That we care about these things.
Exactly. We're saying that we value more than just mindless entertainment.
Okay.
We want our choices to reflect our values,
Yeah.
and we believe in the power of media to create positive change.
I like that. But let's be realistic for a second.
Okay.
I mean, there are still plenty of people out there who just want to zone out
course.
and watch something mindless.
Absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But I think what's changing is that we're becoming more aware that even those mindless choices have an impact.
Okay.
The energy it takes to stream that content,
Yeah.
the labor practices involved in its creation,
Right.
the messages it reinforces or challenges,
Yeah.
these things matter.
So it's not about being perfect
Right.
or feeling guilty.
No, not at all.
It's about being more conscious and
Exactly.
intentional about our choices.
Yeah, and those choices add up.
Okay.
I mean, if enough people start demanding more from the streaming industry,
Yeah.
whether it's greater transparency about their environmental impact
Right.
or more diverse representation in their content,
Yeah.
those demands will be heard.
So we're all part of this feedback loop in a way.
Exactly. Our viewing habits send signals to the platforms,
Okay.
and those platforms respond by shaping the content they offer.
So we have to make sure that we're sending the right signals.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's not just about individual action either.
Right.
It's about collective action.
Okay.
We can support organizations that are pushing for change.
Yeah.
We can have conversations with our friends and family about these issues.
Right.
We can use our voices to advocate for a more sustainable
Right
and
now.
inclusive streaming landscape.
This has been a really eye-opening conversation.
Yeah,
I feel like I've learned a lot about the complexities of this industry.
me too.
And honestly, I'm feeling a little bit more empowered to make a difference.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I think it's important to remember that we're still in the early stages of this journey.
Okay.
The streaming industry is relatively young,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of room for growth
Oh, yeah.
and innovation.
So it's not just about fixing the problems of the past,
Right.
but shaping the future.
Exactly. And that future is full of potential.
Okay.
We have the opportunity to create a streaming landscape that is not only entertaining,
Right.
but also sustainable,
Yeah.
equitable,
Yeah.
and accessible to all.
I love that vision.
Yeah,
But it takes all of us to make it a reality.
it does. It's a collective effort.
Right.
And the more we engage in these conversations,
Yeah.
the more we challenge the status quo,
Right.
the more we demand better from the industry,
Right.
the closer we'll get to realizing that vision.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground here,
We have.
from the inner workings of data centers
Yeah.
to the power of conscious viewing choices.
It's-
But there's one more aspect of Rakuten TV's approach that I want to touch on before we wrap things up.
Okay. What's that?
It's something we mentioned earlier, their emphasis on transparency.
Right.
That first ever sustainability report.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
It is.
But it also raises some interesting questions.
Okay.
So stay tuned for part 3,
Okay.
where we'll delve into the significance of transparency,
Yeah.
explore the challenges and opportunities it presents,
Sounds good.
and discuss why it's so crucial for the future of sustainable streaming. All right, so we're back, and we've been talking all about Rakuten TV and their efforts to make streaming more sustainable.
Right.
But, there's one thing that we haven't really dug into yet,
Okay.
and that's this idea of transparency.
Right.
They put out this sustainability report, which is their first ever.
Yeah.
And it just got me thinking about how important transparency is in this whole conversation about sustainability.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing for a company to say that they're doing good things, but it's another thing entirely to actually put your numbers out there.
Exactly, like to actually show people what you're doing.
Yeah. And to open yourself up to scrutiny.
Yeah, to criticism even.
Absolutely. But it also allows for accountability.
Okay.
Consumers can actually see what you're doing,
Right.
how you're measuring your progress,
Okay.
and where you still have room for improvement.
So it's like an invitation to be held accountable.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think we need more of that in this industry.
Yeah, for sure. Because it can feel very secretive sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Like you don't really know what's going on behind the scenes.
Right.
And I think this move by Rakuten TV could really set a precedent.
I think so too.
Imagine if every streaming service released a sustainability report.
Right.
We could actually start comparing them.
Yeah. We could see who's doing well.
Right.
Who's lagging behind.
Exactly. And, maybe identify some best practices.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it could create this sense of healthy competition where everyone's trying to outdo each other.
To be more sustainable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that could really accelerate progress.
Yeah, but, transparency is not just about, appeasing consumers or avoiding criticism.
Right.
I think it can actually lead to innovation
Oh, absolutely.
and collaboration.
Yeah, because when companies are more open about their challenges
Right.
and their successes,
All right.
it creates opportunities for sharing knowledge
Right.
and learning from each other.
So instead of every company trying to reinvent the wheel,
Right.
they can actually work together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it fosters this sense of collective responsibility
Right.
rather than just competition.
Yeah. And I think that's ultimately how we're going to make real progress on this issue.
I agree.
And it's not just about the companies themselves.
Right.
Transparency can also empower consumers.
Absolutely.
Imagine being able to compare the environmental footprint
Right.
of different streaming services before you subscribe.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, that would put so much pressure on these companies
Absolutely.
to really prioritize sustainability.
Yeah, because they know that consumers are paying attention.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about giving consumers the information they need
Right.
to make informed choices.
And to vote with their wallets.
Exactly.
Support the platforms that align with their values.
Okay, so, we've talked a lot about Rakuten TV
Yeah.
and their specific initiatives.
Right.
But I think what's really exciting is that this is part of a much bigger conversation
Absolutely.
about the future of streaming
Yeah.
and how we can make it more
It's
sustainable.
inclusive.
Yeah, and equitable.
Right.
And I think what we're seeing is that this is not just a trend.
I agree.
This is a real shift
Yeah, a fundamental shift
in how we think about entertainment.
and the role it plays in the world.
Exactly. It's not just about watching movies and TV shows anymore.
Right.
It's about the impact that those choices have.
On the planet.
Yeah, on society.
On each other.
Yeah, and I think the message here is that we all have a role to play.
Absolutely.
Whether you're a consumer,
Right.
a content creator,
Policymaker.
yeah, an industry leader.
Yeah, everyone has a part to play.
Your choices matter.
They do.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
I want to leave our listeners with a sense of hope
Yeah.
and empowerment.
Absolutely. This is not about doom and gloom.
No?
This is about recognizing the challenges,
Okay.
embracing the opportunities, and
Yeah.
working together
Right.
to create a streaming landscape that we can all be proud of.
I love that. Well said.
Thank you.
So yeah, thank you all for joining us on the deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time for another fascinating deep dive.